happy to be a part of this very efficiently organized series, which is running for a long time with many interesting talks. So I'm happy to be part of this webinar series. So I'll talk about some centrality concepts in trees and some idea of convex and quasi-convex functions. So some of you may be familiar with some part of the material which I have probably spoken about earlier. Okay, so there is this notion of centrality in graphs. So what is the central vertex, or what is the central graph, or set of vertices and so on. And it is usually defined using distances. And the theory is more interesting on trees. So I will restrict myself to a tree only. But generalizing to arbitrary graphs and so on are open problems for extending this work to general graphs. Some of it may be possible. So a lot of loose ends will be there with further possibilities. Okay, so the idea that I will be talking about three different papers. So the first one is a paper which appeared in 2017, Convex and Quasi-Convex Functions on trees, with my co-authors. And there we introduce this idea of convex and quasi-convex function. So I think this audience is quite familiar with these matrices, so I will not spend too much time. So adjacency matrix. So I'll consider only undirected graphs and usually connected. So you have the symmetric adjacency matrix, 0, 1 matrix, and then the Laplacian matrix is the diagonal matrix of degrees minus the adjacency matrix. Then there is the distance matrix. And one can also introduce the incidence matrix. First direct the edges and then call it Q, and Laplacian matrix is Q, Q transpose. And that shows that the Laplacian is positive semi-definite and so on. And for a connected graph, as we know, the rank is n minus 1 for the Laplacian. Okay, so I'll consider only tree, as I said. So here is an illustration of the distance matrix. So if you take the tree as given here, then we just write down the intervertex distances in the form of a matrix. If you look at the first row, so distance is of course the number of edges in the shortest path between I and j, but for a tree there is only one path. And so if you look at the first vertex, then the distance from vertex 2 is 1, from 3 is 2, and so on. So it's a symmetric matrix with zeros on the diagonal. And I will not go too much into the usual properties of the distance matrix, such as the distance, the determinant of the distance matrix does not depend on the tree and so on. So I'm not going to go in that direction. But many of the centrality concepts are also defined using the distance matrix. And then later on we will see that some of them are based on the Laplacian. So this matrix is behind some of these definitions. So the classical notions are center, median, and centroid. So center is used in a general sense, but or we say centrality concepts. But the center is one of the centrality concepts and one of the earliest ones, along with the median and centroid. So to define the center, we first define the eccentricity. That is the length of a largest eccentricity of a vertex, I, is the length of a longest path starting at I, and the length being the number of edges. And then you take the vertex with minimum eccentricity. And if there are more vertices, it turns out that for a tree there are only at the most 2 vertices. But for a general graph there can be more, like for a complete graph, all the vertices will be central vertices. Of course, I'm not going to talk about general graphs, just to give an example. But the subgraph induced by the central vertices will then be called a center. So in our case, there is only, I'll state this classical result in a moment, that there is either one center or 2 centers which are adjacent. And so the induced subgraph is just a vertex or an edge called a center. And this is based on the eccentricity. The median, as opposed to that, is based on the transmission index, or sometimes called the status of a vertex, which I will define. And centroid is defined on the maximum branch weight, which also I define. So every centrality concept comes with a function. So first you define a function on the vertices of the graph, and then take the vertex with minimum value of the function, sometimes the maximum, depending on whether you take the negative and so on, but usually minimum of that function. So eccentricity, as I said, you take the distance from I to j over j and take the maximum, that is the eccentricity of the vertex I. And the center is the subgraph induced by the vertices of minimum eccentricity. And a very, very early result by Jordan is that the center of a tree consists of either a single vertex or a pair of adjacent vertices. And the center can be located by, so this is a very simple result, but interesting and classical result. And the center is located by a simple recursive procedure. So you take the tree and you delete all the pendant vertices in one step. And then you delete from the remaining tree, you delete the remaining pendant vertices. I'll just go to the full screen for a moment, but I'll return back. Okay, so what is the recursive procedure? You just delete all the pendant vertices, then keep on doing that. Finally, you will get at least a vertex or an edge, and that is the center. So that's a very simple recursive procedure which determines the center. And there is one more property of the eccentricity, that if you take the center and take any path coming out of the center. Now, when I say a path, that path should not include the other center, if there is one. It should go in the other direction. Then the eccentricity increases monotonically along that path. And so this will be a typical feature of the functions that we consider. So this is not given by the recursive procedure, but some other proof one can employ and also prove this. I believe this was also in that Jordan's paper, original paper. Okay, so there is this monotonicity, and I'll just illustrate one more very interesting proof. This paper contains American Math Monthly by Graham and Tringer and Zekeli. Some other nice results also. It's a very good paper for a talk for graduate students or even research students. So I think I want to spend 2 minutes on this. So this will take care of the proof that there is either one or two centers. It will also take care of the proof that there is either one or two centroids. So basically the idea is very similar. So what is the idea? Suppose you have a tree here. Then suppose I have a vertex. You fix a vertex. Suppose I take this vertex. Then you take a longest path coming out of that vertex. Any longest path. If there is more than one, you pick any one. The longest path is going in this direction. So you mark the first edge with an arrow on that path. You do the same thing for every vertex. For every vertex, you take the vertex and take the longest path emanating from that vertex and mark the first edge with an arrow. So like that, for every vertex, I get an arrow along one of the adjacent edges or one of the incident edges. And so by the pigeonhole principle, since there are n vertices and n minus 1 edges, one edge will end up getting two arrows in opposite direction. That must happen by the pigeonhole principle. So that I have shown separately here. I have an edge ij in which, so the meaning of this picture is, if you start at I, then there is a longest path going in this direction. And from J, there is the longest path going in this direction. That is the meaning of this picture. But now if you take any vertex here, for example, K in this side, then the eccentricity of K has to be more than the eccentricity of I. Because first you go from K to I and then there's the longest path. So the eccentricity will be more. So any vertex on this side has more eccentricity than the eccentricity of I. Similarly, any vertex on this side, say L, has more eccentricity than the eccentricity of J. So I and j are the only candidates where the eccentricity can be minimum. Now, if there are they have same eccentricity, then both of them are centers. But if one of them has a smaller eccentricity, for example, if I has a smaller eccentricity than j, then I is the center. So that is the proof. And the same proof will go through for the concept of centroid as well. Okay, so let me just this. Okay, now coming back to the definitions. So I go to the transmission index. So this is the sum of the distances from the vertex to all the other vertices. So you take a vertex and add up summation dij over j, sum of all the distances. And so that is the function associated with the vertex. And the median of a graph is a vertex with minimum transmission index, sometimes also called a status. So this is also a classical concept. And the same proof that I gave for the pigeonhole principle proof will also work here. You just have to put an arrow in the direction where, okay, I think the same proof will go through for centroid. But it turns out that the median is, it coincides with the centroid. So with this definition, you need a different proof. The proof is not difficult, but you can prove that there is either one median or two medians which are adjacent. This is the second classical concept. So any graph either one median or two medians. And also the transmission index is monotonically increasing along any path starting at a median. Okay, to define the centroid, I need to define the weight of a vertex. And the weight is the number of, so you take the vertex V and you delete it, then T minus V has several components, these are called branches at V. And you take the number of vertices in each branch and try to see which branch has maximum number of vertices, and that is called the weight of the vertex. And the vertex V is a centroid if it has the least weight. So I think I'll show you one more picture that we will often see this picture in the context of proofs and so on. So here is a picture which you will very useful. So here is the vertex V, and you see the branches coming out of that vertex. And you get number of vertices in this branch and take the branch maximum number of vertices, and then you try to minimize that over V. And wherever it is minimum, that is the centroid. Now it turns out that there is either one centroid or two centroids, and they are adjacent in that case. And also the branch weight monotonically increases. So these things are true. And one of the early results, I think it was proved in the mid-60s only, not very early, but one of the relatively recent results, is that the centroid and the median, they coincide for any tree. It's a very surprising result because the definitions are not related at all. The definitions are quite different. And once you start proving it, you get some other concepts, and that's how we started actually looking at various centrality concepts. There is one more centrality concept or one more definition which comes along the way, that V is the unique vertex for which all of these branches have less than or equal to n by 2 vertices. So that is also an equivalent definition. So there is no name I am giving for the center, but a vertex, maybe center in quotes. Let me say that a vertex is in the center if all these branches have at most n by 2 vertices. And it turns out that only the centroid has that property, and so that this definition also coincides with the definition of either median or centroid. And this comes handy for a proof technique. That means it's somehow the proof of equivalence of median and centroid that goes through this in-between concept. And this concept plays a role in the proof technique in many cases. Okay, so I have defined the three classical notions, and now to proceed further. So this is something I already said, that any graph is either one centroid or two centroids and that are adjacent. The weight is monotonically increasing. Okay, the center concept is somewhat different from all the other concepts I'm going to discuss, because I'm going to discuss many concepts which are all equivalent to the median. They turn out to be the same as the median and the centroid, but center is somehow different. And there's a lot of work on how far apart they can be and so on. This is one common research topic in this area, that when you have two different concepts of center, you study whether they are identical or how far different they can be, and especially the comparison between center and median is well studied. But this is just an example that they don't coincide necessarily. So in this tree, X is the center, which can be seen by that recursive procedure I mentioned, and you can check that Y is the centroid. So, and they can be quite far apart. You can, if you go on increasing the number of pendant vertices on this side, the center will not change, but the median will be maybe different. Okay, so they can be different. Okay, for a tree like very symmetric looking tree, you can sort of identify the vertices just by looking at it. But for a more complicated tree, you need some procedure. Just by looking at it, it looks like these two vertices are perhaps a candidate for center. But you need some procedure. Okay, now let me give one more example of a center, which is not the same as median or centroid. And this concept is related to a general concept which I'll talk about later. But by the way, the two concepts of center and median, you might have realized that they are both related to the distance matrix. Because in the distance matrix, if you take the maximum entry in any row, that is the eccentricity. And if you take the sum of the entries in any row, then that is the transmission index. So there is this concept of addition in the max algebra. So when you do addition in the max algebra, you get a maximum. So some of these things can be done using the max algebra addition. Okay, and this Perron center also belongs to the same family in a way, which I will see indicate later on. But here I am just giving the definition that you take the Perron vector. So D is a non-negative matrix, in fact, irreducible non-negative matrix. So it has a Perron eigenvector and the Perron eigenvalue. So Perron eigenvector, you can take a normalized Perron eigenvector. So it's a positive vector entry-wise, and so call it U. And take the least vertex of the Perron vector, and that is wherever it occurs, that is called a Perron center. Okay, and this Perron center, again, one can show that in any tree there is either one Perron center or two Perron centers which are adjacent. And moreover, the coordinates of the Perron center increase, of the coordinates of U increase along any path starting at a Perron center. So similar properties are true for the Perron center, but this is a special case of a more general phenomenon, as I said, which I will indicate in a moment. Now, we did some experiments in some earlier joint work. We did some experiments. We suspected that Perron center also coincides with the median. And literally, we tried many trees, and as far as I believe, you have to go to a tree of at least 30 to 40 vertices before they are not the same. So in almost any tree, the Perron center and the median coincide. Almost any in the sense computationally. If you take this as a conjecture, you will be not. You will have to be very lucky to get a counterexample. Actually, I don't believe there is any counterexample with a small enough tree. And even now, I don't know an example where the Perron center and the median are at a distance 2 apart. Only we have found example of a large tree with 40 vertices or so by repeatedly running the program where the two don't coincide. By the way, it's very easy to come up with centers, concept of centers, which are different from the median or the centroid. For example, you can take the sum of the squared distances. So like a transmission index, you can define a squared version. So you can take summation dij squared. That will also define the center, or a cube, or any power. And that will not coincide in general. Here is one more interesting concept on which there is a lot of work, which does not coincide with the median or the centroid. So what is the subtree goal? I just give the definition, not say anything more about this. And let f of be the number of subtrees passing through V. And you take the vertex from which this number is maximized. I think all these concepts become intuitively quite clear if you look at a path. If you start with a path and then see how this definition works. So, like you will see that for a path, the subtree core, so if you take a pendant vertex, then the number of subtrees passing through this can be enumerated quite easily, but for a vertex in this middle, that will be quite large. So intuitively, it is a correct notion of center. And this notion is well studied, but I won't say much more. Okay, so now we come to a general idea that all of these things are through a function on the vertices. So if you give me a function on the vertices f, which is from the vertex, a positive function, let's say, from vt to 0 infinity, immediately I have a notion of a center, which I might call an f center. So, and sometimes I'll think of f as a vector also, of size n. So if you take a vector of size n, that is same as a function on the vertices, and that gives me a centrality concept. But just an arbitrary function is not going to be interesting. And what are the basic properties we would like the center to have? And those we have already in front of us in view of these classical examples. So vertex I is called an f center if the value of the function is minimized. And some desirable properties are that so the first property, there is no name for it, but I call it sometimes a vertex edge property. That means the induced subgraph is either a vertex or an edge. So there is either a unique f center or exactly two f centers, and they must be adjacent in that case. So I'll just call this property 1. Property 2 is a monotonicity property. So along any path starting at a center and not containing the other center, the value increases. And clearly 2 implies 1, that you can just think about it. And because if there are two centers which are far apart, then using monotonicity can show that. Okay, I think one has to be, just give a small argument. And then the convexity properties, this is the important definition. So if you take any vertex, triple of vertices I, j and k, I adjacent to j, j adjacent to k, then the value of f at the central vertex is less than or equal to the average of the values at the end vertices. So this is the idea of convexity, because you see that the f of the midpoint is less than or equal to the f of I plus f of k. So I call a function f convex if this inequality holds for all ijk, where I is adjacent to j, j adjacent to k of a distinct vertices, and strictly convex if the inequality is strict. In our work, we always need a strictly convex function, because if you take the constant function, that is convex, but it will not have this one center or two center property, and so on. Every vertex will be a center. So strict convexity is required. Now sometimes you need a weaker version of convexity, and that is sufficient, and that is quasi-convexity. So a function is called quasi-convex if for any triple of vertices I, j, k, I adjacent to j, j adjacent to k, f of j is less than or equal to the maximum of the f of I and f of k. This is also a classical concept in optimization or convexity theory. This is not a new concept in that sense, but this definition is new because we are applying it to a discrete set, and it is strictly quasi-convex if the inequality is strict. So we will see that the functions associated with those centers do satisfy the convexity or the quasi-convexity property. So first of all, convexity is stronger than quasi-convexity, because if f is strictly quasi-convex, then you can see that So first of all, convex implies quasi-convex. That is the first observation, which is very easy to prove. And if f is strictly quasi-convex, then for any ijk, I adjacent to j, j adjacent to k, if f of I is less than f of j, then it follows that f of j is less than f of k, just from the definition. And so it is not difficult to show that if f is strictly quasi-convex, then the property 2 holds. Remember my three properties, 1, 2, and 3. So property 2 holds, namely monotonicity. And once property 2 holds, as I said, it is stronger than 1, so property 1 holds. And so if f is strictly convex, then it is strictly quasi-convex, and then also number 1 and 2 will hold. So just like in combinatorics, sometimes we want to prove that a sequence is convex, and we cannot prove that, and we prove it is unimodal. And then, or the other way, sorry, I said it the other way. We want to prove that the sequence is unimodal, that is hard to show, and then we prove convexity. Something similar is happening here, that instead of one or two centers flowing directly, we show convexity or strict convexity or quasi-convexity. Now, a very general class of functions satisfy this property. We just look at this summation here. So I have the distance matrix. I apply any increasing convex function g, which is positive, gx positive, x is positive, and then also I apply a vector here, multiply by a vector, which is a sequence of positive numbers. And I get a very general function, and one can show that that is strictly convex. So this is a very general class of functions, and which is going to be strictly convex. And first of all, the transmission index is a very special case, because the transmission index, all your xi's are equal to 1. And I think I should have here, yeah, so this is j adjacent to I. I think that is required here. That's a mistake. J adjacent to I. So transmission index is a special case. Similarly, there's something that I said earlier, that you can take dij squared or dij cubed, and those are going to be special cases. And so let me just show why the Perron center is also a special case. So before that, I can do this addition also in Max algebra. So then also it is quasi-convex. So again, okay, so yeah, so if it is replaced by Max, then also it is quasi-convex. So I'm not sure whether this is also J should be adjacent to I, but maybe I'll return with some examples. Yeah, please, maybe I'll correct it later on. Okay, so eccentricity is one of the special cases that is strictly quasi-convex. Transmission index is strictly convex, and so both eccentricity and transmission index satisfy 1 and 2. By the way, eccentricity is not convex, because even if you take the example of a path, then you can see that the eccentricity is not convex. Like you go back to a path, the eccentricity of this is 3, 2, and 1. Sorry, 3, 2, and 2. But if you take a longer path, then you will see that the eccentricity of this vertex and this vertex, that is equal to twice the eccentricity of this vertex. It is not strictly convex, but it is quasi-convex. So it satisfies those properties. So I think, yeah, so let me indicate what is happening for the Perron center. So if you take a distance matrix D and apply any positive vector x, so x is just a positive vector, and let me call that as my vector f. So this is my function. So the function is summation dij xj, and as we have seen from the general result, this f center or this function f will have those three properties. And in particular, if x is the Perron vector of the distance matrix, then you can take the normalized Perron vector. Then this will simplify to rho spectral radius times x, and so x itself gives a function which has those three properties. So that is why the Perron center has all those three properties. And but it is more generally you can have any positive vector. So it is a special case of this general phenomenon. Okay, so now I talk about some other concepts which are equivalent to the median and the centroid. So here I am just going to give several definitions, not go into the results. So these are taken from, I'll refer to a survey paper by Reed, where you can find all these definitions, but in a somewhat scattered form. So I think let me just tell you the definitions which I'm going to give, and then come back to the definitions. So, okay, so we have this telephone center, sorry for this typo. So telephone center, and the corresponding function is the switchboard number. So every center has a function associated with it. Then there is a security center, and the corresponding number is the security number. Then there is an accretion center, and the corresponding function is a sequential number. Then there is a weight balance center, and the corresponding function is a weight balance. There is a processing center, and the corresponding function is a processing number. I found these definitions quite interesting. Actually, they all came from actual applications. And so all of these things, and there are some more actually, which I am not stating here. There are some functions based on ratios and so on. But you can find a good survey in this long paper by K.B. Reed. Actually, this whole volume, Interdisciplinary Applied Discrete Mathematics, Advances in. This is a volume edited in the University of IIT in Chicago. And this is one of the survey papers in that sense. There are many other papers related to centrality in this volume. But this particular article, K.B. Reed, that gives almost, tries to summarize all the centrality notions for a tree. And I think he has 30 or 40 different centrality notions defined there. With very sketchy, he gives references but no proofs. So all these concepts are taken from that paper, and one of our, we wanted a sort of a systematic proofs. That is where we started, that try to give a systematic proof which at present is scattered in the literature, that they are all equivalent to the median. And when we try to prove that, we also then prove the other two properties. That means the monotonicity as well as either the convexity or strict convexity or strict quasi-convexity. I will not go into the exact detail of that, but we do have an analog of the third property as well as for all these functions. So what are the telephone centers? So they are all, the telephone center basically for any vertex x, you imagine a telephone network and how many calls can be made through x. And a call is nothing but a path passing through x. We demand that x is an internal vertex of the path, but it doesn't really matter ultimately whether you want it to be the internal vertex or an end vertex. So it is the maximum number of distinct paths having x as an interior vertex, and that is the switchboard number. So switchboard number for any vertex, we have a switchboard number, and then we take the vertex with maximum switchboard number. But ultimately, you will see that it is not surprising that these are related to the median and centroid, because ultimately what will happen is, if you take this vertex, say V, then any vertex, for example, here, and any vertex here, that will give rise to a path. So ultimately, and these are going to be distinct paths. So ultimately, it depends on the sizes of these branches. So it is not surprising. So the number of distinct paths can be found by just enumeration. And so it's not difficult that to imagine why this center coincides with the median or the centroid. But when you actually start proving it, one has to be careful. And also the monotonicity is somewhat tricky, because monotonicity and then the quasi-convexity of the appropriate notion, that needs to be proved. Okay, I'll emphasize one or two definitions more. I will not go into more details of all these definitions. So security center is based on this idea of security number, and that is the I think I'll run over this somewhat quickly. There are two more definitions which are interesting, so I'll spend more time. But here you just take for a vertex x, the security number is, you take any other vertex v, and vxy is a set of vertices that are closer to x than to y. And you take closer to x, first fix the vertex x, then for any v you take closer to x than to v minus closer to v than to x, take the difference, and then take that is the security number, and then take the security center is the vertices with the largest security number. So again, this all the three properties are satisfied here. But the last property, I am not making it precise because sometimes it is convexity, sometimes quasi-convexity, sometimes you have to take the ratio. For example, as it stands, the security center, the security number can be negative. So you have to take care of that. Either you have to take the absolute value or take a ratio. So I'm not going into details, but the first two properties are definitely true. Okay, yeah, this definition is somewhat more interesting. That accretion center. So you start at a vertex and go on labeling the vertices so that you always get a connected subgraph. So any such labeling, so a labeling is a labeling. It's called sequential labeling. If the subgraph is connected for every j, and a sequential number is a number of sequential labelings with x as the first entry. So I think this is a concept which I illustrate just by an example. So you take a tree and then you take, okay, so if you take a tree and then suppose I take this vertex, middle vertex. So I can start labeling it 1, then I can label it 2. I only have to keep the subgraph connected, but otherwise there is no restriction. Then this can be 3, this can be 4, this can be 5. So you enumerate all the vertices. This is one sequential labeling starting at 1. Then you might have another sequential labeling starting at 1, and there are a lot of such sequential labeling. So I can start 1, then 2, then maybe 3, then maybe 4. So I just have to, that means you grow a tree starting at 1. So this is another sequential labeling. So sequential labelings are quite many. So you enumerate those sequential labelings starting at that vertex, and then the vertex, the sequential number is the number of sequential labeling starting at vertex, and the accretion center is the set of vertices with the largest sequential number. So as you can see, the definition is quite complicated, and I believe that one can study this concept more and come up with some more ideas and so on. But at the moment, we only have stopped at showing those three properties. Okay, weight balance center, I think I will not spend much time on this. I just separate it into two trees and take the difference of vertices. So let me, all these definitions you can find in that survey paper. Okay, the processing center is also somewhat interesting. So you start at a pendant vertex. So fix a vertex x, or say, yeah, you go on deleting pendant vertices. And so you will get a sequence called processing sequence. And you stop as soon as the vertex x that you have fixed is reached. So a processing sequence is a permutation, so that x1 is a pendant vertex of t, then x2 is a pendant vertex of t minus x1, and so on. And the processing number is the index of the earliest possible position for x. X is the vertex which is fixed. And actually, again, if you go back to that picture, so all these definitions immediately become clear when you look at the same picture that I had for the transmission index. So if you look at this picture, then so suppose I want to go on deleting leaves until, so this is my fixed vertex, say I want to go on deleting pendant vertices until I reach I. So that means you just have to basically delete all these blocks, but in any sequence. So that is basically the idea. So that's why these numbers in these branches, they come in the picture, and it's not hard to see that that concept also coincides with the median. Okay, so these are the functions with the concept I outlined. And as I said, there are some more, but they are based on ratios of these earlier ideas. But these are the important ones. So telephone center. And in our proof technique, we found that the telephone center was somewhat more interesting as the main concept. I mean, one has to go through some other concept. If you want to prove that two concepts are equivalent, very often you have to pass through a third concept. And that was very often the telephone center that was more important. The number of paths passing through the vertex, that has to be maximized. But all these concepts are interesting in their own right. Okay, this is the survey paper I mentioned. Okay, now I want to go to the Laplacian matrix and some centrality concept based on the Laplacian matrix. This is based on another paper, Chai Wagu. Actually, it appeared in an IEEE journal, and this is not there in MathSciNet, and so it's kind of hidden. Actually, I am also not having the reprint. I only have the proof version. But of course, if you can get hold of this journal, then you can get this paper. And so IEEE journal, Transactions on Systems, Man and Cybernetics. It's a well-known journal, but some of it is not covered in MathSciNet. Okay, so the Laplacian. Okay, there was some dynamical systems motivation, and the paper talks more about that using in control theory. Okay, so when one talks about the Laplacian matrix, one has to, of course, first mention the work of Fiedler. That you have this algebraic. I think many in this audience are familiar with this or have worked on this. So you have the for a connected graph, the smallest eigenvalue is zero, but the next smallest positive is the algebraic connectivity, and Fiedler proved interesting properties of the corresponding eigenvector, namely uh, trees are classified into two types according to Fiedler theory. That there is either, I mean, depending on the signs of the Fiedler vector, you can divide the tree in two parts. On one side, the Fiedler vector has positive coordinates. On the other side, it has negative coordinates. And if that happens, actually Fiedler first proved that in any graph, not just a tree. So this is very interesting. Fiedler, this theory corresponding to the smallest positive eigenvalue related to very deep work, even mentioned in the classical book of Courant and Hilbert. So every time I talk to some mathematician or pure mathematician who is much better in these areas, and I get something new out of it, that how it is related to the Courant Hilbert theory and the Laplacian and so on. But Fiedler, of course, recognized the relevance for a tree and deeper results or more detailed results for a tree. That was the contribution of Fiedler. But for any graph, actually, if you take the eigenvector corresponding to the algebraic connectivity, then if you mark the vertices which have positive sign and the subgraph induced is connected. So that is the main result. And of course, similarly, if you mark the negative vertices, then the subgraph is connected. Uh, but more importantly, there are properties of other eigenvectors also. And I think for a tree, it is very interesting to observe the other eigenvectors. I don't know if you have done this computation, but for a tree, you take the Laplacian and look at the eigenvector for the largest eigenvalue, which we don't do often. So look at the eigenvector for the largest eigenvalue. You will see that the tree splits into a bipartite graph actually. On one side, the coordinates are positive. On the other side, the coordinates are negative. It's a very striking result. Actually, we don't expect it. But this is the sort of version of the Fiedler's result for higher eigenvectors for higher eigenvalues. Okay, now what I want to emphasize here is so this is a type 1 tree that you have a 0, and then some of the branches are entirely 0, some of the branches are entirely positive, and some are entirely negative, and then this is called a characteristic vertex. And then there is a concept of type 2 tree where you have a characteristic edge. But at least if you look at the characteristic edge, then the characteristic vertices are giving you a notion of centrality. So this was not observed or this was not appreciated much in the real days of Fiedler theory. The Fiedler theory is actually starting from 70s. Although some of Fiedler's work is late 60s also. But there is no, I mean, it was not realized that it's a centrality concept. And so it is a centrality concept, which we might call as the Fiedler center. And in fact, the monotonicity is also true, and that was noticed by Fiedler. But very importantly, the convexity is also true. And this was noticed, I think, for the first time by Kirkland, Neumann, and Shader paper, that the convexity is also true. But that was not put in context with these centrality concepts. But now there are some work I have seen where they compare the location of the characteristic vertex compared to the location of the center and location of the median and so on. So now the characteristic vertex is also recognized as a centrality concept. Okay, now what I want to talk about. Okay, for example, here you have to take also the absolute value if you want to, because the characteristic vertex has positive and negative coordinates, so it doesn't make sense directly, our definition doesn't work directly. But if you take the absolute value, then it is strictly convex for a type 2 tree, and this was recognized in that paper I mentioned earlier. And so convexity is also a phenomenon too for the Fiedler vector. So I think at least from now on in future, whenever one talks about centrality in trees, one should keep the Fiedler with centrality also in mind. Okay, now I want to define two more notions which are in this paper in IEEE journal. So if you take the Laplacian of a graph, or let's say the Laplacian of a tree, then I don't know the if you okay, let me take a new. So if you take the Laplacian, and if you take any diagonal entry, suppose you take the ith diagonal entry and you add a 1 to that position, then that becomes a non-singular matrix. And not only non-singular, it becomes a non-singular M matrix. That means it has all the properties of an M matrix. So the inverse is non-negative. So you can talk about the Perron eigenvalue of the inverse. So I have two notations here. One is L sub I. So L sub I is the matrix obtained by deleting row and column, and that is also an M matrix. So if you take Li, that is you take the Laplacian and you delete the ith row and column. Then, as you know, the determinant of this will be 1 because it is the number of spanning trees, and the tree, there is only one spanning tree. And the inverse of this can also be characterized. The inverse is an M matrix, inverse is a non-negative matrix, and one can give a combinatorial description of the inverse because that amounts to a combinatorial description of the minors of the Laplacian deleting 2 rows and 2 columns. But as you know, all the minors have an interpretation, particularly if you delete 2 rows and 2 columns, it has a very interesting interpretation, not too complicated. So that can be done. And similarly, I think my notation for the other matrix where you add, if I am not wrong, it is L tilde I, and that is also an M matrix, and if you invert that, that is also non-negative. And there also the entries have a simple interpretation. All you have to do is, so suppose I invert this matrix and I want the, say, KL entry of the inverse, then you imagine that the tree is rooted at I, the vertex where you are adding a 1, and then you simply take the path from K to I and the path from L to I. They will intersect, and then you take this number of edges in this part. That is the entry of the inverse. So it is a very simple combinatorial interpretation, and this has to do a lot of things with this, maximum entry along intersection of two paths and so on, and some related to some other classes of matrices. Okay, so what I am doing here is taking the Perron eigenvalue. So first take alpha I to be the Perron eigenvalue of Li inverse. So as I mentioned, Li inverse is a non-negative matrix. You take the Perron eigenvalue of that. And yeah, so Li tilde, okay, instead of adding a 1, suppose I add a positive constant C. Then you call it Li tilde C. So this is obtained by adding a positive constant C to the ith element. And that is also an M matrix, non-singular M matrix. So inverse is positive in fact. And you take the Perron eigenvalue of the inverse, and that will depend on C, and that is called beta I C. And it's a nice exercise, actually maybe a good exercise for the PhD student, that if you take the limit as C goes to infinity, not hard to imagine that it will have the effect of deleting that row and column, and that will coincide with alpha I. Remember, alpha I was the Perron eigenvalue of the inverse of Li, which was obtained by deleting row and column I. Now so I have a notion of center based on these functions. So the first function was alpha I of the vertex. So you delete ith row and column, take the Perron eigenvalue of the inverse. That is one function. And the second function was you add a C to the ith row and column, take the inverse of that, and this is the Perron eigenvalue of that. It turns out that properties 1, 2, and 3 hold. So alpha I is strictly convex in fact, and the proof is kind of using that combinatorial interpretation of the elements. So you have to, there are some in between lemmas where you nicely work with the, I mean, you write down the definition of convexity and interpret them in terms of this number of paths and spanning trees, and then everything will cancel and you will get a positive number. So that's the convexity. And but another important observation is that the corresponding center in fact coincides with the characteristic vertex. So that was one more result, and that similar result for beta I is at present in a conjectured form. So what is the conjecture, which we have mentioned in fact in that paper, that so if you do the same thing with okay, so beta IC also is strictly convex, and so it will have its own center, but we have run several numerical calculations, and it turns out that that is also minimized at a characteristic vertex. But at the moment, we did not write much more. This was about 10 years ago we started working there. This paper is not that well known because, as I said, it is in a somewhat different journal than the usual linear algebra journals, so probably it's not known. But this conjecture is mentioned in that paper that beta I also minimized at a characteristic vertex. And since I mentioned that the limit as C goes to infinity of beta I is alpha I, for large C the conjecture holds because it holds for alpha I. Okay, so I think that's more or less all I wanted to say. So we have basically seen a number of notions, centrality concepts, and I'm particularly interested in the convexity and quasi-convexity properties. And I have not looked much at the work of how far the central notions are apart, but that also seems to be a main area of research. I think I will stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the interesting talk. Yeah. Yes, audience, if you have any question, we can ask now.
Bapat, I have a question. Does this centrality notions that you mentioned, does it serve as these facility location problem, facility locations?
Yeah.
Facility location.
Oh, okay. The combinatorial facility location problem. No, I've. Yeah, no, the applications motivated these concepts.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. No, yeah. In that read paper, actually, is a very nice paper to read. The KB in that proceedings, and it only talks about application. So almost 80% of the notions have come through engineers or non-scientists. So these are all motivated by application. Each one of them, the telephone center, all those are motivated by application. And you will find those in that survey paper.
Okay.
Sir, can I ask one question? Yeah, sir, you told that in the Laplacian, if you add a +1 or a positive number, the diagonal entry, is it related to the, when you delete also, it is related to that Li? Li?
Yeah. No, that was a limiting concept, if you remember, that if you add up entry, positive entry is a small c. Let's say the 1, even the 1 entry, suppose you add a small c, and then that becomes an M matrix, so you can invert it. And then take the Perron eigenvalue, and as C becomes large, then it gets related to the deleting first row and column. Not immediately, but for at the asymptotically.
This result is in your papers? This one?
Yeah, but it is there. But this, you can take this as an exercise. The convexity and all, you will need to see the paper, but this part that when C goes to infinity, it coincides with deleting row and column. that you can prove as an exercise, but that is also given in that.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, actually, the convexity or quasi-convexity you define most of the time for most of the definition here, except subtrichor, where subtrichor because of maximality it is concavity kind. The
No, but are you talking of a result which is proved or just dependent as a guess?
no. This is proved because subtrichor when they prove about the either single vertex or two adjacent vertices,
Okay.
they prove first the
Okay.
concavity part. Then using
Okay.
the
I have not seen that.
okay.
Okay.
Except most of the thing related to convexity. So
Yeah.
think anything else defined, I don't know, which are also related to convexity, sorry, concavity.
No, concavity means you just have to take the negative, just negative. Not directly related, but you just have to make it negative. Otherwise, I don't know. Like, it's just a question of maximizing or minimizing. So,
Yeah, because of this
uh,
maximizing part,
hmm.
concavity comes into picture.
Okay.
And also, most of the definition, I think some of them, not most, some of these definitions can be extended to general graph, though there may not be any application kind, where the central part of graphs may be located in a block.
Yeah.
There are not much of a tree. There are a lot of study about the centrality on trees, but not been done on a general graph, though there may not be any application kind. But in some of the cases, it can be extended to general graph and it can be studied, particularly the connected graph.
Yeah, so it gives rise to a lot of research problems. Some of them may be difficult, but as you said, the blocks come in the picture definitely. But each one of those concepts, you will have to carefully see whether it can be extended to a general graph. Like I think it is known that all the centers are located in a single block. I think that is known. But for all these other definitions, even to extend them properly, one has to spend time and see very carefully how much. Like I know the class of median graphs. I won't go into the definition, but for the class of median graph, there are very nice extensions of some of the early concepts. But some of the later concepts are defined. One will have to spend time very carefully to study it. So yeah, it gives rise to a lot of questions, open-ended questions.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, one more question. What about in trees? What about weighted trees?
Yeah. Weighted trees, almost all this will go through without much problem. Yeah, weighted trees, there's not much of a problem. Because when you are talking of the path length, because this all ultimately boils down to distance. And distance you can take care of the weights very easily. Yeah. I think almost all of this will go over for weighted trees.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, I need one reference. You said about the eigenvector corresponding to the largest eigenvalue. It is saying something about the structure, right? Like the fieldless one.
Yeah, actually, even in the, I cannot come up with the exact reference right now, but if you search through the fieldless, these are called domains or something. In the Courant Hilbert theory, there is a name for
Oh, okay. Nodal domain theorems.
Yeah, domain. So if you even through linear algebra application journal,
Okay.
if you search through the domains, you will find that result somewhere. Actually.
Okay.
Nodal domains.
Nodal domains. Nodal domain theorem.
If you do a search on nodal domains,
Okay.
even in a linear algebra journal, you will find that.
Okay.
Find that result.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yeah. Audience, are there any other questions? Okay, if not, let's thank Professor Boppert for his interesting talk. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.